Welcome back to my channel. My name is Michelle, and today I'm going to be doing a video on my favorite books of all time. So this includes like childhood favorites and like more current favorites, and a lot of these books are not like my favorite because I think they're the best books I've ever read. They're more my favorite because of my personal connection, and I'll kind of go into that as I go through the list, like why is it a favorite. So my 10th favorite book of all time is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. I'll give you like a super fast plot summary of each of these books before I get too far. The Invisible Life of Addie Larue is the story of this girl from 17th century France who was like cursed with this like double-sided curse. It is both kind of blessing and curse, and the kind of basics of it is that she can live forever, but no one will remember her. So as soon as she's out of the line of eyesight of a person, they forget her. And so it's about her life over these centuries that she's lived, and how she's kind of like moved through the world but not been able to like really develop relationships because she is forgettable. And for me, here we is. Deborah was a low nose. Okay. He requires a lot of petting. Anyway, for me, this book is a favorite for two reasons. One, I think the writing is really beautiful. Well, more than two reasons. I have a lot of reasons. I think the writing, this book is like really beautifully written. I also love the message. I feel like for me, this message is about really like the beauty of life and just like the joy of living and exploring in this world, and also kind of like the gift of like interpersonal relationships. But also this book is like personally really important to me because it was actually the book that inspired my book. So I'm a broken record, but you know what? I wrote a book, so I'm going to talk about it. But I have a book coming out next year. It's a horror book. There's not that much information about it available widely yet, but I will let you know more when I know more. But it's like, you'll read it and you'll be like, this has no relationship to Invisible Life of Addie Larue. But I loved this idea of this like double-sided curse. I loved the way it was written and kind of this like light magic that allowed V. Schwab to kind of convey this deeper message. I don't know, I just like really got, this book was like at the right time for me and became like a really important inspiration point for my novel. And so it like is very close to my heart because it inspired my novel. I actually have read 0 other books by V.E. Schwab, and I do think I need to change that because she's in my top 10 list and I've only read this book. So hopefully I get in some more V.E. Schwab this year. Because this, for people who love V.E. Schwab, this is normally not people's favorite V.E. Schwab. So I'm excited to try more. This is also like a very controversial book. I feel like a lot of my favorites are like people either love them or hate them. Next up is actually a non-fiction pick, and that pick is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is a non-fiction book about creativity, and this book actually didn't hit me hard until the second reread. The first time I read it, it was like good, but not like great. It wasn't the right moment for me. Non-fiction books really have to hit you in the right moments, and this book, I wasn't ready for it. And I read it again in 2020, and I read it over the course of like 8 months. Like it took me a long time to read. Like I started it early, like pre-lockdown in 2020, and I finished it around my birthday last year. And I really think this book is what propelled me to start writing in 2020. When I said my birthday last year, I meant my birthday in 2020, not 2021. But it is like such a gorgeous exploration of like what it means to be creative, and she talks about how she believes everyone is creative, even people who like don't think they're creative. There's creativity involved in just like being a human and existing, and it is such a beautiful book. The chapters are like 2 pages long, and so I think it's really digestible, and I think it's a good like gift book. Like I feel like most people could get something out of this book, and I think this book was the book that like gave me permission to like write a novel and like seriously be like, I'm gonna write something, because I had always been like, oh, I'm not a good writer. And Elizabeth Gilbert's whole thing is that like you don't have to be good, you just have to like create things. And there's a lot of conversation around like how do we be creative in a way that is like enriching and fulfilling and not always directly tied to money. I don't know, it's really beautiful. It was really important to me, and again, and the moment I read it was the moment I needed this book, and because of that, it's one of my favorites. Book number 8 is, I think, the only like true childhood favorite that made the list. There were a lot on the longer list, but I had to like cut it down. But I had to include my absolute favorite book from childhood, which is Incarc by Cornelia Funkai. I love all of Cornelia Funkai's books, but Incarc is my absolute favorite. And This is the story of a young girl whose father has the ability to read things out of books. So when he's reading aloud, sometimes things come out of the books, but in order for something to come out, something else has to go back in. And he doesn't have like super good control over this power, so sometimes he reads things out of books on accident, and things, he doesn't get to control what goes in either, so like they're like, you know, your cat could get sucked in, things like that. It was just like such a beautiful story about reading. As a like kid who like loved books, I loved this family's like love of books, because they're like a big book family, and also kind of like the magic of books. I don't know, this book was just like so important to me. I reread it in 2020 as part of like my like 2020 rereads, which I did because like the world was falling apart. I like still love it. I'm like excited to read it to my kids one day. My number 7 pick is New Moon by Stephenie Meyer. It will be a dark day in my world when Stephenie Meyer is no longer in my top 10 favorite books of all time. Does this book hold up? Like, not entirely, but this book like raised me. My brain is shaped the way it is because of the Twilight books. New Moon is my favorite, which is why it's on this list, but I love the first 2 Twilight books. The third one is like fine, and I don't believe in Breaking Dawn. Like, Breaking Dawn to me is not canon. I like literally cut that part out of my brain. I've read that book one single time, and it was enough to end my Twilight phase. I like hated Breaking Dawn so much, but I love New Moon and I love Twilight, and I think there's a lot wrong with these books. I'm not telling you that there's nothing wrong with New Moon. I'm just telling you it was like fundamentally important to who I am as a person today, and that I like always will have a fondness for this book. If you have no idea what New Moon is about, I'm confused, but New Moon is the second book in the Twilight saga, which follows Bella and Edward. Bella is like a human girl, and Edward is a vampire, and they live in Forks, Washington, the rainiest place in the United States, according to Stephenie Meyer. I don't know if that's actually true. Edward wants to eat Bella. Obviously, he's a vampire, and at the beginning of New Moon, an incident happens, and he has to move away. And by has to, I mean he decides he's going to move away because Edward makes choices that Edward makes, okay? Why is this book my favorite out of the saga? It is the one with the least amount of Edward in it, because Edward is gone for a large portion of the book. I think what this tells us about me is that I love angst. Like, I'm an angst girl first. The like blank pages with the months on them, like, I'm sorry, somebody get Stephenie Meyer a Nobel for that. Like, that's gorgeous, brilliant, so outstanding. This book is problematic in many ways. You can Google it. I'm not going to go into it, but I also think it was villainized for being a book that teen girls enjoyed, and I'm not cool with that. And I think in some ways we've gotten better about that, in some ways we've gotten worse, but Twilight will always have a special place in my heart. And the books that I like love, like fantasy romance books that I typically love, are just books that are Twilight shaped. I like truly think this, like, I read this when I was like 14, 15, and I think some fundamental parts of my brain were forming in that hour, because I do think my brain is shaped like those hands holding an apple. Like, that's what my brain looks like. And I reread these books again in 2020, and like, they still hit. I never finished Eclipse. That one was kind of boring, TBH, but, and again, Breaking Dawn I like don't believe in. That book is cursed, and I don't like it. But New Moon is my ride or die. Number 6 is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a book that has just grown more and more important to me the more times I've read it. Beach Read is a romance about these 2 writers, one of whom is a romance writer and who has just recently lost her dad, and the other is a literary fiction writer, and they wind up having 2 houses right next to each other on the shore of Lake Michigan. They knew each other briefly in college and had like a little bit of a rivalry, but mostly the story is about them in this summer, and it's following January, who's our romance girly, and she's just lost her father and has also found out some things about his past and how he wasn't exactly the man who she thought he was. And so as much as this is a romance, this is also a story of January grieving her father, and I just think it's like so beautiful and so stunning. It was the first Emily Henry I ever read, and I think the only book I've ever read all the way through and I started over. Like, the moment I finished it, I started it again. There's just something like magical about this book that I can't like fully put into words. I think it's like well loved by a lot of people, but like, I don't know what Emily Henry put in those pages, but it is just like something special, and I love it. I don't have like a super personal story, although like I feel like at this point I have like a very strong parasocial relationship with Emily Henry. Why? I don't know. I've just like clung to her I feel like we would be close personal friends. I like have a nickname for her. Sometimes I message her on Instagram. She's never messaged me back, but if she does, I'm actually like slightly will be embarrassed because there's messages going back like a year and a half of me just being like, I'm so excited for your new book, girly. Like, we know each other personally. So I'm really like really rethinking that at this point. But I love Emily Henry. I love her books. I love all of her books. Beach Read is my favorite. I think it will always be my favorite. It is delightful. My number 5, my top 5 books. This one is a little bit heavier. I think it's the heaviest book on this list, but it is also, I think, the best written book on this list. Yeah, I feel very comfortable saying it is the best written book on this list, and that's In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I also have a very strong parasocial relationship with Carmen Maria Machado. My parasocial relationship is like slightly more, like, I feel like Emily and Henry and I would be friends. Carmen Maria Machado and I feel like I want her to teach me things. Like, I want her to be my teacher, to teach me things. I have had a dream in which I met Carmen Maria Machado at a like college party. And we like sat on like a gross college couch, and she like gave me advice, and the advice she did give me, the most important piece that I remember was that I needed to break up with my boyfriend. And in my dream I was like, yeah, for sure Carmen Maria Machado will get right on that. Unfortunately, I am single. I do not have a boyfriend, so unclear with what to do with that information in my waking life. But if I could use that, if I find a way to use that information, I'm glad Carmen Maria Machado has become my dream writing mentor, as in when I'm like sleeping, she gives me writing advice. I don't know if break up with your boyfriend is writing advice, but I'm going to take it as such. Anyway, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado is a memoir of Carmen's time in an abusive relationship, and it is stunning. She tells it in these like tiny vignettes that she uses like different structures and forms to like shape. So they're like, some of the more memorable ones I remember are like, so there's like Dream House as word problem. This is Dream House as like rapture. There's like Dream House as like gothic horror. There's Dream House as like they're like short, they're mostly just like a couple pages long, but it is just like stunning. It is one of those books that I read and I was just like in awe that someone could like craft this out of words, that it was possible to write this beautifully, and also like importantly, it's like a really important story, I think, as well, about the different ways abuse can look. I don't know, it was just like gorgeous and important, and also I feel like is one of the reasons that I chose to start writing horror, because I was like, horror is for the girls. Horror for the girls. What I mean by that is that I think horror works best and is done the most kind of intelligently when it is portraying, like, horror is about scary things, but most of the time the truly scary thing is not the monster, but it is like the societal or interpersonal dynamics underneath that it's like actually the true horror. Number 4, we're getting into like the really good one. I mean, all of these are like really good. I like love these books. The number 4 is Rising Strong by Brene Brown. This was my first Brene Brown book, and I read it again. It was like the moment I needed it. I read this book right after I graduated college. And this book, if you're not familiar, is Brene Brown is a sociologist, I believe, and like social worker who works in the field of like vulnerability. She's a vulnerability researcher. So her research is a lot about like interpersonal relationships and like bravery and vulnerability and joy and kind of the important things that you want in your life. And Rising Strong, for me, the most important parts, I think everyone has a slightly different perspective about what it's about because you take what you need from it. But for me, it was largely about how do we recover from failures and how do we grieve failures. I think it's largely about like allowing yourself space to grieve failures and to try again. And for me, I read this book while I was failing. I really struggled post college and also deal with like the massive life changes that come with graduating college and trying to find a spot in the real world, and I did like quite poorly at it. Like I was bad at it. Like I really truly like failed for like a long time. Am I still feeling? Sometimes it feels like I am. I like being an adult and like what does that mean? And I think It made me like very sad, and I had to like grieve the loss of like the future that I thought I was going to have post college, and kind of my failures and not making my world look the way I wanted it to. But I also think Brene gave me the tools to like build myself back up post that failure, post like being really, really depressed post graduating college. And this book has tools in it that I like still use and reference to this day. And like one of like my common like mental messages that I like say to myself is like, we're out here trying to make Brene Brown proud. I like often think when I do something like brave and vulnerable that I'm like, Brene would be proud of me. Writing this book, Brene would be proud of me. When I talk to I like say it like pretty frequently. When I like turn in edits, Brene would be proud of me. I send a hard email, Brene would be proud of me. Anyway, so I like wound up being really attached to this book, and so it's a favorite because it's really important to me. Okay, that's the last serious one. Good news. Whew. We're into the fun stuff for the top 3. It's my third most favorite book of all time. It has like been demoted over the last 2 years, which is sad. It was my favorite book for a long time, and that's The Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. This book is just like pure joy. And like, you know what? That's what I wound up reading most of the time. It is like, I've heard it described as like adult Twilight, which I love. But it is the story of Diana, who is a historian, and she is like a guest professor at Oxford, and she encounters this magical book, and she's a witch, but she's like never used her witchiness, right? Like she's really like, her parents died when she was pretty young, and it's kind of like put her off for magic. She's kind of bad at it, but also she like kind of doesn't want to deal with it. And in this world there are witches, vampires, and demons, and witches and vampires are like pretty self-explanatory, and demons are just like super creatives sort of situation. Diana has this magical book, but it turns out this magical book, everyone, like all the witches, all the vampires, all the demons want it. And they like don't really, they like work together just to make sure magical creatures are like not found out. But there's like a lot of tension between the 3 groups. But lo and behold, what happens is Diana falls in love with a vampire named Matthew. And Matthew is very Edward Cullen shaped in terms of attitude and spirit, and also the fact he's a vampire. And it is just like a gorgeous story about their forbidden love, and also like magic, and also Deborah Harkness is like a historian, so there's like a lot of history and like juicy, beautiful stuff in it. And I love it so much. But I think one of the reasons I love it so much, and it was a favorite for so long, and it's still in like my top 3, and again, I think this is a book that will be here for a long time, is I read this book for the first time when I went to Italy for the first time, which was also the first time I went abroad, and I was traveling by myself for the first like 2 weeks that I was in Italy. And so it was like a very overwhelming experience. It was very cool, incredibly grateful I got this experience. I went to Italy to do research for my senior thesis in college. But since I was traveling by myself, I didn't spend a lot of time out like doing nightlife. Like, one, I'm not going to the clubs regularly anyway, but especially traveling as like a young woman by myself, most of the time, like after dinner, I would just kind of go home. And so then I would go and I would read A Discovery of Witches in my bed, and I was reading it on trains and planes when I was like traveling around. And it was just like such like a comfort and such a beautiful thing to escape to. And I was also traveling by myself, so it was like a little bit lonely, and it was like, I was really grateful to have this place to go to at the end of the night. It's a trilogy. I read the whole trilogy while I was in Italy. I've reread it a couple times. I love to read it when I'm traveling because it's so like, reminds me of like coziness and safety at home, or when I'm like sick. But I love this book. Will probably always love this book. It is like so cozy, so delightful, such a good time. The top 2 are both add-ins in the past 2 years. I think this one is actually the most recent addition to the favorites, and I knew it was, again, while I was reading it. I thought it might be my favorite book while I was reading it. I have demoted it to second place, but it is so good, and that's Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. I love the Throne of Glass series so much. It is my favorite series of all time, and this is my favorite book in that series. Queen of Shadows is like such a delight of a book. It is the 5th book in the Throne of Glass series, and it is the book where like that you really start to see like the tides kind of churn in Heir of Fire, which is the 4th book in the series. The tide starts kind of turning, but by Queen of Shadow, we really have like the wheel rolling down the mountain, and all the characters are pretty much in the same place, so we see all of them interacting together in a way that is like so fun and magical. The relationships are so good, the moments are so good. My favorite moment in the entire series happens in this book. I mean, I love this series a lot, but my favorite moment in the entire series is with Aelin and Rowan in the graveyard. I will say no more than that, but if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. It's a really sweet, heartwarming moment that made me sob I cried a lot in Queen of Shadow as well. I cried a lot in Sword of Glass, but this book is just like excellent. If every book felt like this one while I was reading it, I don't think I'd ever be in a reading slump. Also, I don't know if I would ever do anything else. This book is just like such a joy to read. It was like so good. This series is like one of my favorites. What is the Sword of Glass series if you're not familiar? It's Sarah J. Maas's probably the second most popular series. It's the series she wrote first. A YA high fantasy series about this teenage assassin. She's like 19. I feel like you can't actually explain it without giving too much away, because like the first book's really not what the whole series is about, but you like don't find out what the whole series is about until like the third book. It's like a slow build. The first two books are kind of rough to get through. They're not like terrible, but they're not great. But like the rest of the series is so worth it. It's so good. So good. With my glowing recommendation for Queen of Shadows. You may be wondering what my favorite book is of all time. And my answer is basic. I understand that. I'm okay with it. My favorite book of all time is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This story is the story of Evelyn, this famous Hollywood starlet, as she recounts the journey of her like life to a reporter as like a 70-year-old woman. She like came up in like 1950s Hollywood and now has kind of like lived a full life. It is about Evelyn and she's had 7 husbands over the course of her life, and Monique, the reporter that is taking her story, is asking her like which of her husbands was the love of her life. And it is mostly about Evelyn recounting that story. There's stuff with Monique interspersed, and Monique is my least favorite part of the story, if I am being honest. I like have complaints. I think there are like valid critiques of this book. It's not like I think this book is flawless, but I do think this book is excellent. I love this book. It's my favorite. I like can't even fully articulate why it's my favorite book. It's just I think such a beautiful mix of like enjoyment and like interesting conversations, and Evelyn as a character is just like so dynamic, and she's like unlikable in a lot of ways, but you like deeply care for her. And there's like lots of love stories in this and lots of relationships, and I don't know, Taylor Jenkins Reid writes gorgeous books. I love all of the books I've read from her, but I think Evelyn is my, and by I think I mean I know Evelyn is my favorite. I just like I love the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes these stories of like complicated people who are morally a little bit like gray, but you like still love them anyway. And I don't have like a great personal connection to this one, except that when I was reading it, like I immediately knew that it was my favorite. You put me on and said I was your favorite, in the immortal words of Taylor Swift. This book also does make me think of Taylor Swift in like a very deep personal way, and I am like desperate for the hope, the dream that one day when Taylor Swift is an old lady, she will write a book, like a memoir of all of her boyfriends, all of the friendships, give us all the tea, like Evelyn Hugo. Also, I truly believe in my heart that Taylor Swift has read every Taylor Jenkins Reid and loves them as much as we do. I like can't live in a world where that's not true. Oh, speaking of Taylor Jenkins Reid, you know what also comes out today? Carrie Soto. Carrie Soto comes out this very day. And I do like to think that Taylor Jenkins Reid did this as a birthday present to me. And I appreciate it, Taylor. I really do. I will be going to the bookstore tomorrow. I'm going to wait until my birthday, and I will be purchasing this gold-covered lady. Shout out to Taylor. I like forgot about that. I'm very excited. I'm sure I will enjoy it. Taylor Jenkins Reid's famous women series is being concluded with Carrie Soto, who is a tennis star. We met her briefly in Malibu Rising. I'm excited to hang out with her. But that is all. If you have questions about my favorites or book recommendations for me based on my favorites, if you read my or you heard my favorites and you're like, I have the perfect book for this girly, let me know in the comments below. Let me know your favorite book. I would love to know what your favorite is. I feel like that's always fascinating. It's like a hard question to answer, something I really did have to ponder. There is a spreadsheet. And I will talk to you so soon. Bye.